Welcome to the Victor Emmanuel Nature Tours webinar. I am Ben Reynolds, host and organizer of the event webinar series. Thank you for joining us today. We are delighted to offer this educational presentation, and we hope you enjoy today's topic on migratory birds connect us, the spectacular migration of raptors over the Florida Keys. Let's welcome our main presenter, Rafael Gálvez.
Hello, everybody.
During the session, all attendees may ask questions. Please note that questions will be answered at the end of the presentation. However, if you have technical questions during the session, I'll try my best to address them in real time to help you have the best viewing experience. This webinar is being recorded and will be available to view on demand anytime at your convenience on our Victor Emmanuel Nature Tours YouTube channel. A link to the recording will be delivered to you in an email tomorrow afternoon. Now back to our feature presentation. I would like to introduce you all to Rafael. Rafael Gálvez was born in Lima, Peru, and comes from a long line of cevicheros dedicated to appreciating the rich cuisine of the Peruvian Pacific coast. He has been birding and illustrating birds since childhood, a dual passion that developed when his family moved to Florida. Always with a sketch pad in hand, he has traveled throughout the US, Latin America, and Eurasia in pursuit of birds and leading tours for Vent. He served as a board member on the BirdLife International affiliate in the Republic of Georgia and Audubon chapters in Florida, developing educational and conservation programs. In the Caucasus, he produced retrospective books and catalogs on the works of regional painters. He worked in the development and branding of Georgian wines during an era of viticultural renaissance after the fall of the Soviet Union. He currently lives in North Central Florida, where he is busy completing the artwork for a series of field guides to birds and their habitats. His works have been published in a field guide to raptors and owls of Georgia, Caucasus, birds of the Coaheti region, and Audubon schoolyard ecology. After working with raptor research along the Black Sea, he returned to Florida to spearhead a new phase of the Florida Keys Hawkwatch migration monitoring project. You can find some of his latest sketches in the field at galvezbirds.com. Thank you for joining us today, and we are thrilled to have Rafael present about bird migration. We hope you enjoy the webinar. Without further ado, we will turn to Rafael's presentation.
Thank you, Ben. This is always an interesting moment when he gives me the controls. So let me do that real quick. And I'm going to turn off my camera, but I will see you in just a little while. Okay. All right. Thank you all for joining me, and I hope that you can see my presentation. It's in full screen now, and you can set up your screen the way it's comfortable for you. All right, so what I'm going to do with this presentation is try to share with you my love for migratory birds, particularly during the fall season in the Florida Keys. Now, raptors are in the title of this presentation, but I'm not going to talk only about raptors. I'm going to talk about all migratory birds because at the Florida Keys Hawkwatch Migration Monitoring Project, we count all migratory bird species, despite the fact that the project started with monitoring migratory diurnal birds of prey. So let's start paying just a brief overlook at how we try to classify migratory flyways. And this is not etched in stone, but it's a useful tool that helps us sort of understand the flight trends of several species. We have an Atlantic flyway that covers almost the entirety of the stretch of the Florida Peninsula. If you can see the Florida Peninsula right there, I'm going to move my mouse to help you find the Florida Peninsula. But you can also see that the Mississippi flyway also converges with the Atlantic flyway in Florida. And the Florida Keys, actually, the little square, the white square that you see there, are the middle keys where our count sites are. Actually, is more in line with a lot of the birds circumnavigating the Gulf of Mexico as they're coming down the Mississippi Flyway. So we have this best of both worlds as these two migratory flyways are coming in, and some birds are continuing down southwestward towards the Yucatan Peninsula, and other birds are flying directly south into Cuba and beyond. So we keep on zooming in. This is basically the scenario that I'm showing you here. Now, at our sites, we are in tiny little islands, less than a mile in width in some cases, surrounded by water. The water to the north of us, between the mainland of the peninsula and the upper and middle keys, is called Florida Bay. And it is 500,000 acres of Everglades National Park, entirely shallow water with hundreds of islands. And it's a fantastic place for birds coming down along the Gulf Coast and towards the Keys. And by the time they reach our Keys, they've already been flying over water. And that little speck of land is in many parts insignificant, unless the birds happen to be so tired that they'll use it as stopover habitat to refuel and continue their flights, or to rest. And this is what often happens. But it is important to remember that we are surrounded by water. So if we simplify this map, that square in the middle that you see there, that is the middle keys, and the bottom map is a zoomed in version. The two red dots are our two count sites. We start every morning with transit counts at Long Key State Park. And as we're wrapping those up, a different part of our team is starting by mid-morning the counts at the traditional site of the Hawkwatch at Curry Hammock State Park into the afternoon. And usually the team that starts with a transit count comes and relieves the Hawkwatchers for lunch, so they get a little bit of a break, and then we all join together into the afternoon. So it's a lot of fun. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you through a day of monitoring migration as part of our project. Now, I'm going to share with you real events, and the photos are all taken from the Hawkwatch, or from the Hawkwatch sites. These are all true events that have happened in the span of a week, but I'm going to compress them into like the ideal day. And you're going to come with me and an additional migration counter. I will have the clicker. The other counter will have the pad to write down every bird, and we jot down every bird that we detect, every individual bird, and we categorize it to species, distance, flight direction, and attitude, and its relation to the habitat. Okay, so here we're zooming in even more. Here's Long Key State Park. See at the bottom there in that green sort of triangle, that's the loop that we make every morning. And it starts at the northwestern point in a hardwood hammock, goes down into a mangrove forest. Along the coastline towards the east, there's mangroves and what we call a berm. Then it loops back northwestward into a salt pan or a xeric area that toggles between being baked and exposed by the sun and dramatic periods of flood by the tides or by heavy rain. And then we loop back to the hardwood hammock. And the hammock is a forested area in the West Indies. So our hardwood forests in the Keys, we called hardwood hammocks, okay? So we walk into the hammock and you realize right away, wait a second, I don't recognize any of these trees. Even if you've been to Miami, you are far away in terms of habitat distinctions when you're in the Keys. A lot of the hardwoods here reach their northernmost range in the Keys. While here, the gumbo limbo is one that does get into the continental part of Florida. Many other trees like blolly, jowwood, pigeonwood, cinnamon bark, Gulf gray twig are entirely associated with the West Indies and the Keys. And this is almost jungle-like, but the canopy is very, very low because these forests are edged by storms and hurricanes. So the canopy is sometimes at eye level, sometimes below you, almost like a bonsai forest. It's really beautiful. And you notice right away that there are chuck-will's widows everywhere. This is arguably the best place anywhere to see chuck-will's widows out in the open. These are already migrating birds. They already have the breeding season behind them, and they are acting in a very different manner. They're not competing for territory. They're not trying to conceal a nest. They're trying to pretend they're a piece of bark. And it is unbelievable how I have countless photos of chuck-will's widows like this, often with many twigs and out of focus leaves in the way. But right away, it sets the tone for where we are. And these chuck-will's widows are all on their way out of the continent. Around us and above us are warblers everywhere, primarily black-throated blue warblers, palm warblers. There's also northern parulus, redstarts. The less common birds may be blackburnians and chestnut-sideds. Black-throated greens are around too. But you notice a lot of ovenbirds everywhere, and there can be a lot of ovenbirds in the Keys during the right time in migration towards the end of September, early October. A lot of northern water thrushes. By this point, Louisiana water thrushes have mainly moved through, but there may still be some around. A lot of black and whites are still around. As we get into the mangrove forest, we see these spider-like roots of the red mangrove. There are also these finger-like pneumatophores of the black mangrove, and deeper in the buttonwoods, we see shorebirds and wading birds. And along the coastline, we start seeing movements of songbirds. There is a string, a line of just incessant eastern kingbirds moving through. And I start clicking. And before half an hour is through, I've counted 1,800 eastern kingbirds. Most of them are moving through, but some of them are lingering on the treetops. And as you scan, you realize, wait a second, some of these kingbirds are different. And you notice these almost comical, heavy-chested, large-billed kingbirds. These are great kingbirds that are being flushed through the region by this large movement of eastern kingbirds. Gray kingbirds are one of our specialties, and it's such a fun bird. Throughout the summer, you can hear their calls, pitire, as they're called in Cuba and Puerto Rico. They are a larger cousin of the eastern kingbird. Their northernmost range is South Florida. They breed there, but as the fall moves through, they start disappearing until they're gone by the wintertime, except a rare one or two. So we see several of these also. Here's a close-up of that massive bill and that mask. And it's more of a gray back rather than a black back compared to the eastern kingbird. Such a fun bird to see. And one of the reasons why people love coming down to the Florida Keys to find these guys. The trees are filled with fruit, and these are poisonwood trees. They look like tiny little miniature mangoes, and in fact, the poisonwood is related to the mangoes. If you eat one of these, you're going to regret it. But the birds love them. All birds love them. So you start looking into the tree and you see red-bellied woodpeckers are there. Even laughing gulls are gleaning on the wing, eating some of the fruit. Catbirds. The first thing we focus on are these large, dark birds. These are white-crowned pigeons, another Florida specialty. They are on the move too. Few will remain in the winter in the Keys, but there's a massive migration, which is actually very interesting. A lot of it tends to be towards the east, towards the Bahamas, also towards Cuba, and even northward into Everglades National Park. These are beautiful Patagioenas pigeons. The bottom two are young birds. The top one is an adult. And here we get a bit of a closer look. The adult to the left with that stark white crown, that buffy nape, and even an iridescent rows of scales in the back of the neck. The immature bird to the right, a lot plainer and even dingy looking. Here's a mockingbird in the middle of the poisonwood. And you notice this one little bird that's bullying all of the vireos. There are red-eyed vireos and white-eyed vireos, but this one little bird is bullying everybody. It's a black-whiskered vireo, another specialty of the region. And at this time in October, they're becoming harder and harder to see. And the same thing that was happening with the eastern kingbirds and the gray kingbirds is, in a sense, happening with the red-eyed vireos and the black-whiskered vireos. As large numbers of red-eyed vireos migrate through the Keys, they sort of flush out the black-whiskered vireos with them. And by the end of the fall season, you cannot find a single black-whiskered vireo, despite the fact that they bred and were very common in the summertime. One of the few songs you would have heard in the middle of a mosquito-ridden hammock in the Florida Keys in the middle of the summer, okay? And amazingly, as we're looking, we find a fourth vireo species, and this is relatively new. At the site where we've been monitoring at Long Key, there have been some young, thick-billed vireos that have been lingering around, and it may be evidence of them breeding in the area. This is still considered a vagrant, or a very uncommon, regular, increasingly more regular Caribbean species. And we're hoping that we'll see one or maybe more immatures or a family group this fall. So the possibilities just are mind-blowing when you're birding in the Florida Keys, especially when it comes to Caribbean vagrants. As we get into the woods, again, these are low canopy, thick woods, you realize that there are bootios all over. As many as 7,000 plus broadwing hawks migrate through the Keys on a given fall season. And as these birds are moving through, if they're caught midway in the Keys during migration, they will sleep within the canopy. The broadwing hawk is, after all, a forest bootio, very comfortable in the woods. And it's interesting, as we walk through the Florida Keys hammocks, especially sites like Long Key State Park, we selected this park for a reason, is that the birds seem to feel protected in there. Even when you're walking through, they seem to just remain there, waiting for the day to heat up, the thermal activity to pick up for them to continue their migratory flights. And we start looking around, we see several dozen broadwing hawks, and wait a second, these are not broadwings. Short-tailed hawks. Short-tailed hawks are also bootios, another forest bootio, but even more secretive than broadwings. It is really difficult to see broadwing hawks perched during the daytime inside the woods. You can see them throughout the Keys during the fall and the winter, the best place to see them, but it is really tough to see them perched. And these are young, dark birds. We'll talk about short-tails a little bit more later, but they come in two flavors, if you may, a dark and a light. And these are young, dark birds. We know they're young by the speckles on their breasts. Beautiful. We continue out of the wooded area into the salt pan, the xeric area. And here to the top right, you see our counter with a clipboard writing down everything that is being seen. You see how low the forest is here. They almost look like shrubs. And the bottom two photographs show the same trail, but on the left, when it's flooded, sometimes dramatically rising from one day to the other up to knee high or even to a little bit higher. And then a couple of days later, it'll be caked dry. So it's a place of dramatic changes. We start scanning around, and one wonderful thing about this salt pan is that these storm-strewn larger trees are all over the place in the form of these snags, these bare bone-like snags, and the raptors, as they're waking up, love perching on them. And our site has been voted time and again as one of the top 10 sites to view raptors. And this is one of the reasons why, is the intimacy of these islands, the lack of expansive available habitat, and just the nature of the habitat creates these situations where birds of prey perch out in the open and sometimes in very close proximity. So as we're scanning, we see several merlins. We count right away nearly 10 merlins, some deeper in the shrubs, some out in the open. And wait, there's one bird that is not a merlin. The one to the right is actually a young Mississippi kite. Here again, a merlin to the left and a young Mississippi kite to the right. It's interesting how similar those two plumages look. Although as you start looking closer, you notice very different head pattern, but that general brownish streaking through the breast can give you a second look. And as you can see by the proximity of these photos, you can get sometimes very close to these raptors. They're still waking up, they're still early in the morning, they haven't gotten that migration juice on. More and more merlins all throughout the salt pan. And we continue walking through the salt pan. You're helping with the eyes. The other counter is jotting everything down on the form. And then we start seeing peregrines. By the time we have finished walking through this salt pan, we have seen over 20 peregrines of all shapes and forms. Some molting into their adult plumage, other pale young birds as the one on the right, quite close and curious about us walking below it. Some birds in the distance, closer birds that appear very dark. It's really interesting with peregrines. We assume that the majority, the large volume of peregrines that come through the Florida Keys are mostly the migratory tundra subspecies that is a boreal breeder, if you may, across North America. But it's really interesting to see just the variety, the individual markings. Some birds are really pale, some are buffier, some are richly colored. It's really interesting, and there's still much to be learned about these birds. So we're continuing along the coastline, finishing off on this salt pan, and we see the first of the squall lines coming through. And weather in the Florida Keys is crazy. You can have a storm build up out of nowhere, tear through the area with just crazy amounts of rain, and then an hour later it's bright and sunny and super hot. And this cycle can repeat many times throughout the day. So we pick up the pace. We want to make it back and loop around to the place where we started, in a sense, the hardwood hammock before the rain starts. And you notice low flying songbirds, so low that you can take pictures with your phone camera, as I did here. These are blue-gray gnatcatchers. They are being brought down by the squall line, but using that tailwind to their advantage. And they're not stopping. Cuba is only 90 miles to the south, and they have their eyes set on that. And they're moving through in several layers at various altitudes. Just incredible. And I'm clicking and clicking. Before half an hour is passed, they're gone. And I have a very conservative 650 blue-gray gnatcatchers detected. Now, only one person can click. You may have seen more, but we err on the side of caution. And so long as we use the same standardized method, every time we go out there, we have a way to gauge these numbers against prior years or future data sets. We make it back into the hardwood hammock, and you see something moving really fast in the canopy. It's a bird you don't recognize. We'll put our eyes on it. Oh my goodness, there it is. What is it? It's gone. A sulfur-bellied flycatcher. There are less than 10 records of sulfur-bellied flycatchers in the Florida Keys. Fortunately, you took a photograph of it, and maybe we can find it a little bit later. We search and search, but we can't find it again, and it's time to go. It's already noon. We need to grab lunch, and we need to go to the Hawkwatch. So here is the next group of keys towards the southwest. The A, as seen here on the top right, the little circular island, is Little Crawl Key, from where we've been conducting our Hawkwatch starting 1999. Now, I came to be the director of the project in 2010. The project, in the way that we run it now, was started in 1996 before Curry Hammock State Park existed. So it was just a few miles up the road in a barren field. When the park was started, it moved effectively to Curry Hammock State Park in 1999, and we've been running it from the same exact place ever since. This is a project that started primarily as a diurnal migratory bird of prey monitoring project, and it quickly grew to simply documenting every migratory bird passing through the area, and there's way much more than raptors. So there is our little bathhouse where we come from. It really is a beautiful site. It can be hot, especially at the beginning of the season, and the weather can be crazy. In 2017, Hurricane Irma devastated the area. Long Key State Park, where we do our transects, was blown to pieces. Some of the structures at Curry Hammock State Park were gone, but it was a great period for us to finally rebuild our deck and get some support from the state park system to build a much bigger deck, and we're coming back stronger than ever, or we've come back stronger than ever. We arrived to the Hawkwatch, and the counters are already there, and it's been a great osprey day. Our site is one of the top 5 sites anywhere in the world for ospreys. We get to see as many as 4,000 during a single season. And what started kind of slow with ospreys is quickly building to a really interesting day. It seems like the squall lines have pushed ospreys that we may not be seeing out far offshore, closer to the shoreline. And during the final hour of the Hawkwatch, 301 ospreys passed through. And this is actually a real graph from one day in early October a few years back. These kinds of events happen at our sites. Now, Ben, I will ask you to play the video with the frigate birds. And before, well, go ahead and play it, and I'll explain it. All right, I hope that you all enjoyed that. So frigate birds are a staple at our location, and they're so much fun. They're not raptors, but they go through these dramatic movements. And something that has been recently learned through transmitters placed on frigate birds in the Keys by the Avian Research and Conservation Institute, who we often work closely with. The frigate birds that breed in the dry tortugas, which are the only frigate birds breeding anywhere in the continental US are not the same frigate birds that have these crazy movements through the Keys. In a period of a couple of days, the birds in the Florida Keys could be in Central America, off the coast of Belize, and they can come right back. And we often see these trains with hundreds of frigate birds coming through, and it's just so much fun. Also, large numbers of white pelicans are moving through at this time of year. Ducks, anhingas. Anhinga, remember, is a freshwater species. So if it's in the Florida Keys, where there's almost no fresh water, it is likely migrating through. And it's really interesting to see these beautiful flocks moving through. Now, I'll play one last video for you, and I want you to take a look at this. Ben, please, the Nighthawk video. All right, so I hope you enjoyed that as well. Nighthawk migration is still much a mystery, and it is often very difficult to monitor their migration, but we see this kind of scenario in the Florida Keys all the time, and they're silent. When I first saw this ages ago, I remember seeing these flocks of low-flying birds. I thought, what are those? Are these shorebirds, gulls? Because they're flying so unlike nighthawks, as we tend to see them flying up high and making all these pirouettes and high-speed daredevil dives. These birds are just flapping. And in this case, this was the scenario, this one particular instance, when during a period of a few hours, we saw over 4,000 Nighthawks, and they were all flying pretty much directly south in direction towards Cuba, and they had come from over the 500,000 acre water abyss of Florida Bay and from Western Everglades, and who knows from where they'd come. It's super interesting, really neat. These are the kinds of things that we experience in the Florida Keys. And of course, as the afternoon comes in, we start seeing the first of the flying anchors. Peregrine Falcons start moving through. And if you didn't know this, I'll tell you now. Our site is known for its Peregrine Falcons. They just start coming in and in. What started with a handful of peregrines at the beginning of the day quickly turns to a 3-digit Peregrine Falcon day. Typically, we would end by 4 o'clock, but our protocols call for an addition of 50 minutes if a certain number of birds are seen in the last 15 minutes of that time stretch. And we keep on pushing the time, and more peregrines keep on coming. And before the day is over, we have seen 279 Peregrine Falcons in just one day. Sounds amazing, but it's only the beginning of October. And as we get closer to the sweet spot, which is October 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, we may accumulate as many as 3,000, 4,000 Peregrine Falcons for the entire season, with an amazing 1,506 peregrines seen in a single day. And this happened in 2015, around that time period. So the Hawkwatchers were tired. Everybody high fives. We've seen lots of peregrines, lots of fantastic birds, but everybody wants to go back to Long Key to see if they can find that sulfur-bellied flycatcher. So we go back and we notice that there are Swainson's warblers on the leaf litter. Such a beautiful bird. What a wonderful place to see them in the hammocks of the Florida Keys. I can think of no easier place to see them as they are working their way here, eating little spiders and whatnot. And then someone's starting to scan. We can't find the sulfur belly flycatcher. It never shows up again. But wait a second, what is that? A Key West quail dove? No, it flushes and it's gone. And all these are true stories. This can happen if you come visit the Florida Keys Hawkwatch during the fall. So let me give you a little bit more. Let's get out of storytelling mode and get a little bit more into the nitty-gritty of what this project is about. Like I said, I started in 2010. The project started in its current form in 1996. It went through several management bodies, universities, international organizations, and then it fell into a void, a management void. And I had been in the Black Sea region doing migration research over there, and I'd come back to Florida. I'd already had a story with this project, which I'll tell you in a little while, and I saw a wonderful opportunity to rebrand the project and become independent by bringing in local bird clubs and conservation groups to help support. So here's our new deck, beautiful, large. This was our old deck, a quarter of the size before Hurricane Irma. And whenever we had several volunteers and visiting groups, wow, it got super crowded. I'm not going to spend too much time on this chart because there's a lot of numbers here. The point that I want to drive across here is that while our site is not known for the large numbers of broad-winged hawks that fly along ridge sites in the Northeast or in the Midwest of the US, or the big, massive numbers of turkey vultures and Swainson's hawks as can be seen in Mexico, our site is one of the key sites in terms of diversity. We've seen regularly as many as 19 raptor species, and we're working on a 20th because one raptor species was just seen a few days ago that is not on this list. I'll tell you about that later. Our bread and butter are peregrine falcons. Falcons in general, we are one of the top sites for merlins and kestrels as well, for ospreys. We see a diversity of bootios, but people often come and say, have you seen a red-tailed hawk? Red-tailed hawks are actually quite uncommon in the Florida Keys. We see northern harriers. We see a nice number of sharpies and Cooper's hawks. And we have our specialties, which I'll get into. So peregrine falcons are the thing of lore at our site. And it's important to remember that this site really was born out of an interest to understand more about peregrine falcons as they were struggling through a period post-conservation, and it was unclear whether conservation efforts had worked. And it turned out that the Florida Keys was the perfect location from which to monitor the volume of almost all the migratory birds in North America moving through this one fine point. Like I said, we also get large numbers of merlins, and it's really heartwarming to think that 1,000 merlins could be seen during a particular season when most merlins are wintering in the United States. So these merlins are really hardy little birds that are continuing into the Caribbean, into northern South America. By the time we see them leave our sites going towards the waters, they are in uncharted waters. And some of them may not return. It's very perilous. They're gonna go through areas where there are no protections for these birds. My heart goes out with them. Kestrels, we have not seen these 4,000 count seasons in a long time. And as you may know, kestrels are not doing too well right now. they're at key sites more than 40% below 30-year averages, the counts for kestrels, and that includes our site. We're seeing big drops, and our data goes to, it's funneled to contribute to the Raptor Population Index project, which publishes periodic trends on the populations of North American raptors. And we hope that it's not too late, and I think it isn't for the American kestrel. Like I said, ospreys are big at our site. I'm not gonna linger on these numbers. We see a lot of broadwing hawks, like I said before. Our highest count was 7,000 plus in 2012. And it's really fun to see them moving through in these kettles that are the thing of hawkwatches throughout North America, right? And all of these right here are broadwings, the eventual red tail. If we see 1, 2, 3 is our max in the season, this is an uncommon bird in the Florida Keys, unlike most of North America. Red shoulder hawks are a common breeder throughout Florida, but they really don't go too much farther south. Key West will be the end of the run. So we see some of them, but not too many. And then, of course, short tails, as I was talking about before. Like I said, they come in 2 flavors. Here's a young, pale, morph short tail hawk. We know it's young because it has a buffy wash and the little specks on the flanks and a little bit on the wings. Here is a composite of a dark short tail. See how dark they look. And one interesting thing about the short tail hawk, that superficially it looks similar to the broadwing hawk, but boy, is it a completely different beast up in the air. Notice in the top left and top right photos how it holds its wings in a slight dihedral. So the arm, so to speak, is a little bit higher than the body, but the fingers are sharply upturned. And it gives this bird a buoyancy and an ability to just kite in the air motionlessly, almost as if it had been pinned to the sky as it scans for its prey on the tops of the trees. Its favorite prey is primarily birds and some reptiles. Here are some more images of that flight silhouette and flight style. It's a much more muscular looking bird. It's really not more short-tailed than a broadwing. It just has the trailing edge to the secondaries is longer, giving it an appearance of a shorter tail. And then it'll do this thing where it'll be suspended in the air, scanning down, and then it'll fold up and plunge head and talons first, and then it'll do what we call parachuting. It'll open up its wings again, just short of getting to its prey, and delicately and quickly pick it from the treetop and go into a secluded forest and eat it. Awesome, awesome. A lot of people don't know that we get to see regularly Swainson's hawks in the Florida Keys because a number of them winter in South Florida. What route they take, where they come from, this is unknown, and it's quite mysterious, and it almost would seem like they're coming along the Gulf Coast, flying over the Florida Bay, over Cape Sable, over Florida Bay, into the Keys, and calling back to winter in the Everglades. Something like that seems to be a trend, but we still don't know. And of course, Sharpies and Cooper's hawks and Northern Harriers, all of this stuff is also at our Hawkwatch, but I want to focus on the specialties. And here we arrive to a big one, swallowtail kites. Swallowtail kites. There's a reason why Florida Fish and Wildlife, Tropical Audubon, the Florida Birding Trail, so on and so forth, they all use the swallowtail kite as their symbol, because this is a beautiful, elegant, impressive flyer. Really, it's the Raptor with 2 sets of wings, in a sense. Notice the picture at the top left, how its wings are held almost in a cupped sort of downward arm form, stiff, but the tail is sharply turned in a completely different direction, almost using that as this very capable rudder or second set of wings. One moment they can be almost butterflying buoyantly, almost, you know, dilly-dallying next to you, and the next minute they're pirouetting at full speed and they're gone, disappear around the curve and beyond, full speed. Impressive, beautiful birds. Now, our site is the top site for swallowtail kites, but we have a problem. We've had a problem for a long time, and I'm going to share this with you. Swallowtail kites arrived to Florida to start breeding in February. Believe it or not, in February, they're already gathering nesting material in the Everglades and in the Keys. By mid-July, they're already flying south. They're already exiting entirely the continent. So our project, which starts in September, we count swallowtail kites and we get the best numbers, but we miss a month and a half of their migration. And it's always been an issue. Doing a proper swallowtail kite project is like a separate project altogether, but we're doing it this year. This year, we're counting starting August 1st. We're gathering the funding. We already have the team set up, and it's going to be a lot of fun. If any of you are in South Florida for August, come down. We're going to be counting a lot of swallowtail kites. So look here at this simple chart. In 2014 was the 1 year where we counted a bit into August, and we had significantly higher numbers of both swallowtail kites and even Mississippi kites, because it appears that Mississippi kites are also moving through significantly earlier than the other birds through a region. And it's not surprising considering that the upper half of Florida has many breeding Mississippi kites, and they're expanding their range. At our site, you can see 4 kite species, some of them not as regularly as the others. So we have to the top, on the left side, 2 Mississippi kites, but to the top right, we have a snail kite. Now, something interesting has happened. For many, many years, there had been only 1 snail kite seen at our site in 2007. And years went through and no snail kites. I'm sorry if I said something else. I meant snail kites. Now, the snail kite is another Florida specialty. It requires very specific habitat, and it eats almost entirely apple snails of the genus Plumacea. It's been hanging by its bill for decades. Big trouble with water fluctuation issues and water management and conservation of big areas. It's been such an issue. But there's been a payoff, and the numbers are rebounding. And as a result, we are seeing more and more young, sometimes as many as 3 during a season in recent years. And these are young birds that are just playing around in general. They're not going to find any proper feeding habitat in the Keys because there's no fresh water. And Birds with Transmitters, again through ARCI, the Avian Research and Conservation Institute, is demonstrating that first-year snail kites are roaming widely. So they're even including the Keys as part of their exploratory ventures. And to the bottom right, whitetail kite is a bird that a lot of people don't know also has a small breeding population in Florida. So here are our counters for this year. They were also our counters for last year. Luis to the left and Mariah to the right. Now, what they're looking up at top, those look like little miniature kites, but they're not. And here is part of the silver lining. Yes, we love the Raptors, but boy, all kinds of other things show up in the Florida Keys. And last year, Bahama swallows flew over the Hawkwatch, and in recent memory is the second time it happened. It happened again in 2014, and you just don't know what's gonna show up. And there's something amazing about going out for day after day, 3 days, a week, a month, to a migratory site and seeing those changes, those cycles, the different species that come through, the outliers, the bulk of your bread and butter species going through and then ebbing and eventually leaving the area altogether. And aside from Bahama swallows, all kinds of surprises are possible in the Keys. Luis, just a few days ago, scouting ahead of our upcoming season, photographed a zone-tail hawk near the Hawkwatch site. This would be our 20th species. We hope that it sticks around. That's the bird to the top left. It's a fuzzy photo, but undeniably a zone-tail hawk. Similarly, a couple of years ago, he had an Antillean palm swift in the area, another mega. Bahama mockingbirds, top right, appear relatively regularly in the Keys. We've had 2 years with northern wheatears showing up at our count sites, bottom left. Also some vagrants from the west, Bolix oriole. A red-leg thrush stuck around in the Keys for almost a year recently. And just a few days ago, not too far from the count site, an Elania of unknown provenance, silent, made an appearance really quickly and disappeared. Amazing. So, and of course you have all your regular migrants, which make it just so beautiful. Songbirds and wading birds and shorebirds. By the end of any of our seasons, we may have counted over 200,000 individual birds of over 170 species as the result of more than 3,000 hours of volunteer work. A lot of sweat equity into this project, but we love it. It's just so much fun. We cannot lose sight of where these sites came from. Just a few decades ago, local agencies paid people to shoot pesky birds of prey at migration sites. And of course, that's a story of Hog Mountain and many other sites in the Northeast, where they've turned it around and created these amazing places for people to converge, to learn about migration, and have an amazing recreational experience. You'd think that in the South we have the same history, but we don't. And I want to share with you as I close, I want to go back in time to 1535 to be precise, when Gonzalo Fernández de Oviedo y Valdés published his General and Natural Histories of the Indies. He worked for the Royal Crown of Spain. He was stationed in Florida, Cuba, the Yucatan Peninsula, and he was recording everything that he was seeing, the people, the nature, and he wrote an interesting passage. Check this out. Every year there pass from the end of Cuba infinite numbers of diverse sorts of birds, which come from the north of the firm land and cross over the Alacrane Islands in Cuba and fly over the Gulf southwards. And basically what he's describing is this, what we are seeing today in the Florida Keys, but this is 500 years ago. And you'd think that we've learned so much about migration in that span of time. He goes on, so many that they cover the sky. The lowest are the eaglets and the eagles, and all seen birds of prey of many kinds and plumes. Just beautiful, just makes the hair on my back stand. But it wasn't until 1989 when the first hawk counts were conducted in the Florida Keys, precisely as an effort to understand the Peregrine Falcon conservation story. And at this time, National Audubon advertised for volunteers. And I was a teenager at the time. I didn't have a car and had really crappy binoculars. And I called and asked if I could volunteer, and they turned me down. I can understand, I was a liability. There's more to that story, and I'll tell you in a second. So the Florida Keys day counts turned heads when an astounding 129 peregrines were counted in a single day. Numbers like that hadn't seen outside of Cape May or Kiptopeke. And a lot of people started paying attention. Can't lose sight of the fact that peregrines had come from this awful period where the egg thinning induced by DDT had crushed the eastern population, and it was depleted in a sense. In 1991, as an avid bird watcher and artist, I got caught with a group of friends spray painting the word kestrel on an abandoned water plant in South Florida. All the kids got kind of, free with a slap on the wrist, but I was on a sort of a contentious visa with my family, and it complicated my status here in the US, and it complicated for decades, I'll be honest. But at the time, I was told that I had to do community service, and that's when I called the migration project in the Keys, and they turned me down, and I did something else for my community service project, but I never forgot this project. I always wanted to come back to count birds in the Keys. Here you can see it. The Northeast filled with migration monitoring sites. As you get into the South, almost none. And that one site that you see there in North Florida, it hasn't been active for several years. And you'd think Florida being this finger pointing the direction as the birds fly out of our continent and funnel through this peninsula into unknown regions of the world in terms of their protection and their conservation, you'd think that there'd be more attention paid to migration, but there isn't, and we're working on that. We're doing projects that reach out to language, across language barriers, to people that speak Spanish, Portuguese, Haitian Creole. We work a lot with kids, do all kinds of fun projects. We have banding demonstrations and bird viewings and field trips, do all kinds of fun projects. And this is what it takes to cultivate that kind of culture, migration culture that exists elsewhere in the US. We have a long way to go in the South. This will be where I'll end. I'm going to tell you one story, how migration connects us. Several years ago, the Falcon Research Group, Bud Anderson, a good friend of the project, was putting transmitters on breeding peregrines in Baffin Island, way up north, almost near Greenland. And he would follow these birds, migrate all the way down to southern Chile. Unbelievable journey. And one year, one of those birds flew right over the Hawkwatch. And as the bird left Baffin Island, it flew past several migration monitoring sites in Ontario, New York, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Delaware, Virginia, South Carolina, and eventually into Florida. Before it reached the Keys, 30 migration counters had made the connection. And I'm not even including the many visitors and friends that were nearby. There were 4 of us counting in the Keys when that peregrine continued south over Cuba, across the Gulf into Honduras, Nicaragua, Costa Rica, Panama, Colombia, Ecuador, all the way to southern Chile. By the end of its journey, that one bird had drawn a connecting line between our little park in South Florida and more than 100 protected areas across the Americas, underlining that hemispheric relevance to our efforts. That peregrine falcon even flew along the coast of Peru, where my brother was living at the time. And after I urged him, he went out with a group of people and saw peregrines migrating along the coast of Lima. And despite not having seen him for years, I'd like to think that we were also reconnected by that peregrine. So this is a time when we need to be telling personal stories about birds and how they connect us to the places that we love and to this beautiful, fragile planet that we live in. And thank you so much. Please visit the Florida Keys Hawkwatch website if you want to learn more about migratory birds, if you ever want to come down and visit. And if you are interested in a vent tour in the Florida Keys during the fall, now we've never done this before, and it would be amazing, let us know. we do have tours in South Florida in the spring, and though it's a different kind of migration, it's still awesome. Unfortunately, the South Florida and Keys tour is sold out, and the first Dry Tortugas tour is sold out, but the second one still has slots. So rush to sign up before it's filled up. And that's it. Ben, back to you. Thank you so much for tuning in, folks.
Wow, thank you, Rafael. That was amazing. Now let's ask the audience for some questions. We'll let those come in, and I'll go ahead and take over the slides.
I'm going to turn on my camera again. All right. I hope that was enjoyable.
Definitely, very enjoyable. And I love the personal touch, the story. It's spectacular.
I think that migration becomes very personal to a lot of us when we make those kinds of connections, when we find birds that we've seen through our journeys, or if we're immigrants and we realize that the bird that we used to see at home is also in this new part of the world. And it could be, you can be moving across the United States and realize, oh wow, there are Baltimore Orioles here too. It makes you feel connected and at home right away.
Here's a question from Mary. Do you encounter many banded birds on the counts?
Sometimes, you know, at our site, because the nature of the Florida Keys being so flat and so expansive, many of the birds that we see are distant, and it's an art to identify them. And our Hawkwatchers, of course, are very talented and very experienced and can detect these birds a mile away. But with the advent of amazing digital cameras, we can often photograph them, and we've many times discovered birds with bands, not only raptors, but also piping plovers and other shorebirds that we've made calls for. In recent times, we've gotten results from ospreys with bands, piping plovers with bands, and peregrines with bands too. Yeah.
That's great. Let me take a minute and let everybody know what our upcoming webinar is. For the last 16 years, Vin has operated birds, history, and culture cruises aboard the venerable Sea Cloud. These programs are unlike any other we offer, combining birding, amazing cultural and sightseeing excursions, and cruising on one of the world's most authentically beautiful sailing ships. Our next Sea Cloud departure will visit Spain and Portugal April 19th through 29, 2022. From Lisbon to Valencia, we'll travel a magnificent route along the south coast of the Iberian Peninsula, focusing especially on the birds, history, and landscapes of the famed Andalusia region of southern Spain. Please join Victor Emmanuel and Barry Lyon on July 1st for the next presentation in our event webinar series, Spain and Portugal aboard the Sea Cloud, Birds, History, and a One-of-a-Kind Ship. Through words and photographs, Victor and Barry will describe the birding and sightseeing attractions of this fine cruise while conveying the pleasures of the Sea Cloud experience.
Sign me up. That sounds awesome.
It is spectacular. All right, so let's see. We have a few other questions here before we wrap up our program today. Florian wants to say, big thanks. What a story. That's a lot of passion. What it's the sincerity of it all, absolutely brilliant. He is speechless about the end when you present about the people that cross all the way of that Peregrine Falcon.
And that's just one bird. Think about it. By the time we see hundreds, if not thousands of birds, and all the people involved and dedicated and passionate about documenting these birds, we really are a beautiful network and a web, and it's we're losing an opportunity if we don't reach out and connect to this migratory flyway that's connected through people and birds. We really are missing an opportunity, a beautiful opportunity. Let's do it.
Yeah, let's do it. Exactly. Year after year, too. Florian has a question. How can you explain the 301 ospreys that arrive in 1 hour? Was it weather? Is it time? Is it wind?
Right. Despite the fact that our site is really one of the top sites for ospreys, we know that ospreys, and this we can tell from birds with transmitters, especially the University of North Carolina, Charlotte. Bob Beauregard has been putting transmitters on ospreys, and most ospreys, as they're flying down the Atlantic coast, when they get to the Florida Peninsula, veer directly to the east and enter Cuba on the eastern coast to reach northern South America on the east side of Brazil. So the birds, despite the fact that we're seeing up to 4,000 ospreys in one season, we're missing the bulk of them. So those squalls out of the east pushing birds closer to the shore are part of those birds that we would never be detecting because of the weather, you know, and a furious short stint of a weather of a squall line like that made possible those 300 birds that we may have not seen at all because they were too far out to detect.
Ray has a question. What are the travel connections from the U.S. West Coast, air to Miami, I suppose, and then what?
The connections, the travel connections in terms of airlines. So
yeah, I guess like if you were going on this South Florida and the Keys tour, what is the logistical transportation modes of transportation?
Oh, how do we travel in these tours? Well, we use two different forms of transportation depending on what part of the tour you do. So if you are in the South Florida and the Keys tour, we do that all by vans, like we do most traditional tours with Vent. We cover 4 national parks: Everglades National Park, Big Cypress, Biscayne National Park. And then if you are also on the Dry Tortugas extension, we stop at Key West, and from there we take a private boat. We're one of the few tour companies that has always been using a private boat, and we have a captain that we've been using for a long time, and we're out there for 3 days while the competition goes out for just a few hours on a ferry that's filled with hundreds of people, and you're only there from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. We're there we do pelagic birding all the way out. Starting early in the morning, we arrive when the ferry is not there. We're there for a full half a day, a full day there entirely to explore, mostly on our own, and then another half day with a pelagic return. So.
Great. Let's see, we have a few comments and one more question before we end today's program. Pam and Mike say that they'd be interested in a Florida Keys fall migration tour.
Oh, great. All right, we have 2. All right, we're already there. Okay.
Sandra says, super presentation, thank you. Humans are wired to pay attention to stories, so your approach is excellent.
Thank you. Let's tell stories about birds. That's what it's all about. That's why I love tour guiding. It's an opportunity to share these stories.
And Marilyn and Warren say thanks.
Thank you for tuning in.
Well, I want to thank you, Rafael.
Thank you, Ben,
for such a wonderful presentation, and everybody in the audience today, thank you for joining, and we hope to see you again for our next webinar. Hope everybody has a great day. Bye now.
Bye-bye, everybody.